Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. It is my distinct pleasure to have Dr. Jacques Jospitre here on the podcast. Going to be talking about the world of psychiatry. Going to be speaking about telehealth. Going to be talking about functional medicine and the role it can play in all of our lives. Jacques, thanks for taking the time to hop on the podcast here. Looking forward to speaking about Soho MD and everything you're creating.
Jason, thank you so much for having me here today. Really excited to talk about psychiatry and how it can have a positive impact on people's lives.
And I know you have a background in business, tech, created Soho MD, but you pointed out to me, so many of the creators of these apps, of these platforms are more of the business background, not coming from an actual, medicine, health expertise. So, where did your journey begin? How did you decide, hey, I'm going to become a psychiatrist, and then later on, I'm going to build Soho MD?
Yeah, totally. It's a great question. Thanks. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then how I got into psychiatry and what's a little different about MD versus other businesses in healthcare. So Jacques Jospitre, psychiatrist with a background in business and tech. I spent most of my childhood growing up writing software. So that was just, that was like my first language after English. Was writing different programming languages like C, C++, assembly. But over time, I was always fascinated with the human potential. I was always interested in how do you understand what you want to do with your life and how do you pursue it and achieve it? Those were things that helped me get through grad school. Like I went to both business school, I went to medical school, I went to residency. So it's a very long process. And I was always looking for ways to make that work for myself more efficient. And then I was really interested in just this notion of really applying the work of psychiatry to helping people achieve those same things in their lives. Not everyone is pursuing healthcare or medicine. Not everyone's on a long journey, but everyone has a purpose, hopefully, that they find in in their lives that they want to pursue. And when they don't have mental health, it gets in the way of them achieving that. And so in my long-term pursuits and goals in life, I was able to use tools that helped me. And I was really inspired by the ability of leveraging the power of psychiatry, both with talk therapy and with medication, to be able to help others achieve mental clarity and pursue their life goals. So that's how I got here. In terms of healthcare, what's interesting is people talk in general about how healthcare is broken, how it's expensive, and how there's so much money that goes in, but people don't seem to get things out. Like this country, we spend more, one of the top spenders on healthcare, but the overall health of the average person isn't there. And a lot of that has to do with the financial factors and forces that shape treatment. And what I found is that, there were a lot of people, especially post-COVID, where a lot of money went into healthcare, a lot of investments went there. And a lot of the businesses were focused around creating an architecture, creating a business model that might have optimized the financial benefit, but it wasn't really thought through from the clinical perspective. And what I've been working on at SohoMD is, being a doctor first is how do I create a approach to psychiatry which
Mhm.
really focuses all the effort around optimizing the person's health, their brain health, and then how do I make the financial forces fit that so that you can have a profitable business model, but that the starting point and the priority for the company is trying to understand what are all the ways that you can really help a person achieve optimal mental health. And that's what got us into functional medicine and integrative health in combination with standard psychiatry, which is a unique proposition that we offer to the marketplace.
Optimal mental health. You'd mentioned everyone should be taking steps to improve this and to hit their full achievements, realize their purpose. What are some of the more common conditions, obstacles that you see presented here in 2026?
In this country, we tend to be overweight. We tend to be undernourished. And so the first thing with being overweight is that tends to put your body in a state where it's dysfunctional. We have, metabolic issues where people, their bodies aren't processing nutrients properly. They're not processing energy properly. They feel They feel, they feel that they don't have the ability to get through the day, that they don't think clearly. They're just not sure what's going on. But just the fact that, we're not exercising, that we're not eating well, just that overall state is the first challenge that we have in terms of our overall health. The second thing is a lot of the food that we eat, like it's engineered in a way that, it has great shelf life and it tastes good, but it doesn't necessarily give your body and your mind everything it needs to function at the optimal level. And so it's not something that people think about day to day in terms of how they're approaching their health and approaching their diet. So it creates it sets people up to really not be operating at their best level. And when it comes to the current approach to psychiatry, these aren't questions that the typical psychiatrist or mental health practitioner is asking. They're typically looking at the DSM and saying, going down a checklist of symptoms in terms of what are you experiencing, and then coming up with which medication might help address those symptoms. But when you take a step back and you understand what's really causing a lot of the symptoms that get in the way of people understanding how to function at their best, a lot of those questions really get into the space of nutrition and endocrinology and other aspects of your overall health that isn't really at the core of the way we think about psychiatry. And so in asking these questions, that's what has helped shape approach to care, that we look at all aspects of your overall health to help you achieve mental health.
So we're eating foods that are inexpensive, they can be tasty, but that nutrition is affecting us. We're not thinking as clearly as we could be. I've seen the percentages of how many Americans are overweight, even by a small percentage in comparison to other countries. And you're tying that into the root of these mental conditions. So not just treating the symptoms, but taking it a step back and trying to understand, hey, how can this individual live a healthier lifestyle that'll allow their brain activity, the overall mental wellness to be at a better place.
Exactly. Where mental health is a facet of your overall health.
Mm,
And so that's where we're shipping it back. And when you look, further back in psychiatry, people, did approach the overall health, of your body, of your mind. It wasn't just about a list of symptoms. Like the DSM is a very powerful tool, but it's not a substitute for practicing medicine and understanding all these different medical conditions that actually present psychiatrically. And so when you incorporate that knowledge base, that information, in addition to what we do with standard psychiatry, you get very powerful outcomes for patients in a very cost-effective way. And so that subtle shift of saying, what else is happening with my patients, as a psychiatrist, what else is going on? Let's do some labs, let's look deeper, let's do a full workup and a full diagnostic list of all the things that could be related to those symptoms. You suddenly find that people, it's not just depression, it could be tied into their thyroid not functioning
mm,
properly. Someone who is thought to be manic, who's been manic depressive or having bipolar disorder, or some sort of, mood variant, it could actually be hyperthyroid or some other, endocrine dysfunction. People who think that they are, have attention deficit, they're like, oh, I have adult ADD. It might be that they're actually not absorbing B12 very well and they have a B12 deficiency, giving them the sort of dementia-like process where their focus and attention is off and their memory is low, but it's actually a B12 deficiency that could be fixed through B12 and not a stimulant. So
mm.
combining just this perspective of nutrition and endocrinology into the thinking and framework around psychiatry, it really helps shift the outcomes for patients. It really helps give them hope where it's not just a label and a prescription they're going to have for life,
Yeah.
but we understand that there's an underlying problem that we're able to identify and fix.
'Cause that is the common generalization, right? Medication, psychiatry, what you're saying is, "No, I wanna understand the root cause." Endocrinology, let's look at the labs, that B12, absorption, I wanna look at that for myself. I forget
Totally.
names at times, and I imagine everyone's got a little something that's standing out to them from what you're talking about here. So you're trying to get an understanding of what is taking place, in someone's, body, their chemistry, if you will. Uh, what role does talk therapy play in this? And what type of timelines, what type of breakthroughs are you looking for once you get to that stage of, I'll call it the treatment?
Yeah, talk therapy is incredibly powerful. the beliefs that you have about yourself, about your world, how how you perceive yourself, it really does shape your experience. And people talk about the placebo effect, meaning simply because you think something's working, like it suddenly works, and it works sometimes just as well as certain medications. That we don't fully understand why belief and thought has such a massive impact on our experience of reality, but it does. And so that's a key component of treatment and getting back to optimizing your performance and optimizing your health. But the two have to go hand in hand. So you can have the biological approach where we want to do things where we optimize you physiologically, meaning getting your body to function at its best. And then the second part is this talk therapy piece where we want to understand how you think and help you gain insights into how you're structured. And one of the key things I think when it comes to making real progress in talk therapy is really understanding trauma. So experiences in your life, and trauma is like emotional scar tissue. So the ability to identify what are the things that have happened in your life that really impact, how you think and why you see yourself the way you do, being able to work on that in a talk therapy, session with your therapist, and being able to clear out that scar tissue is one of the ways to really make significant progress in your life. And I think what's fascinating is how people can spend a lot of time in therapy, but the approach to therapy doesn't get to these clear anchors, right? So there are these emotional anchors which kind of slow you down, where you're like, you might be in therapy for years and say, I feel like I'm not getting where. I feel like I'm not making progress. And in some cases, I think that's true. There's a lot of quality variance in terms of how effective therapy is. And so there are different ways of approaching it or thinking about it. Whereas some therapists can be much more effective and efficient in helping you actually structure an approach to your care that you make progress. Because I don't think the purpose of treatment, the purpose of all of it, right? The purpose of going to a psychiatrist, going to a therapist, it's not to keep going to one, right? It's about what are you trying to achieve with your life, and is the work that you're doing in session, is it helping you get closer to what you're trying to do outside the session, right? And if it's not, then you have to question it. It's all about, what do you want? And are you is it happening for you? Relationships, career goals, whatever it is the work that you're doing in therapy helping you get there? And I think that's a good way of seeing the efficiency and effectiveness of the work.
Zooming out a bit, looking at the timeline, looking at the goals, the momentum, the quality variance, I could imagine are pretty wide range. And imagining all of the different professionals in your space, it's so profound to me what you say about trauma and the scars. I did a professional communications course and found things from my childhood, teenage years that show up in my day to day decision making process and was able to complete those. I imagine that's, part of talk therapy, being able to identify those and work through them like you're mentioning, so your past isn't showing up in your future. What about external factors? Social media, how much time we spend a day on our devices, the news, headlines, how that can play a role shaping, impacting our beliefs. We're inundated with so much digital media, I could tell you from my area of expertise in this day and age. Do you see that showing up a lot in talk therapy?
It does, and I think one of the things I've really been spending some time thinking about is the fact that, especially for younger people, younger patients, that the systems, there's no filter, right? And so we talk about the power of beliefs, we talk about the power of like what you visualize, what you think about. We're living in a world where you have the floodgates open in terms of just poor quality content, in terms of the messaging, in terms of even the imaging, right? This very low quality content that's being flooded into young minds. And so it's one thing for us, right? So we're older. We were at a time where we had time to kind of form our internal system and structure. So we kind of have a sense of the world, what's right, what's wrong, what makes sense, what doesn't. And so that was built in a much more controlled setting. But now we live in a world where there's just there's just no boundaries, and just everything, it's like a free for all. And so I don't think we fully grasp the damage that's being done through social media, through the fact that we don't have companies really taking a leadership role to really protect younger people who don't have those barriers, who don't have those protections up yet. And I don't think we fully understand what's going to be the mental health crisis that's created from that. We talk about like increased anxiety, increased depression, increased isolation, even increases in suicide rates. Like I think we see some of those early signals, early warnings. But in terms of are we going to have a true consolidation, a true maturation of people who've been exposed to this kind of flooding of information, where their whole structure, how they see the world, how they perceive things, might be a little bit more fragmented than what we might have experienced in the prior generation. And so I think you hit on something that is truly a potential crisis in the making, that most people, people kind of hit on it and hint at it and talk about it. And I don't fully understand what the impact will be, but I do think it will be significant.
Sure. I imagine it comes up in the therapy quite a bit. Working in media, it's about attention grabbing headlines. It is about oftentimes focusing on fear and the
Mhm.
negative. That's what gets clicks. That's what gets engagement. That's what gets more time spent on a piece of content. I've worked with publishers directly, and that's what they're playing for. It's not always to be this responsible voice as much as to hit their metrics, their goals. So I do think there will be more boundaries. There will be a focus on quality and accuracy more so in the future. It starts to get into different philosophies for governing and what free speech looks like. I think that gets stretched at times, but maybe just indicators, levels of approval, stamps. Again, even saying that, I could imagine a portion of the audience having differences of opinion on it. But it's almost as if you want people arguing on some of these platforms to get more time spent. I think many of the algorithms are stimulated by that today.
I think I think you're 100% right. And I think, but I do think that, there has to be a moral compass for companies. Like things can't be about pure
Agreed.
profit, right? And I think, and that's like, what we were talking about before in healthcare, that there are a lot of companies and a lot of people who've entered medicine to find ways to make more profit, which is great. Like I love the profit motive. I'm a capitalist like any other
Sure.
business. So, but you can make money, but you can also make the world better. Right? It doesn't have to be at the expense of the world. You don't have to, say profit is the number one motive and everything else doesn't matter. It does matter because we live in this world. We want, an environment that's healthy and safe. We want people to be mentally, sound and living to their fullest potential. I think, we want to have that experience for each person. It's not that you make money at the expense of others. I think that there's a way you can balance the two things out. But I think it's interesting when, we were talking about food before, right? So part of, I think, a lot of what, we're seeing that we've been able to fix with functional medicine are things around the food. So quality of food. So there's a, there are a lot of things that we see in our food supply that they don't allow in other countries. And so, we've done things in a way that we allow people to make profit at the expense of the consumer. And again, I think it's okay to make a profit, but you have to draw the line somewhere. And I just wonder with social media if it might kind of follow the same path with food, where it might take a long time before we get into like, people coming up with this segment of like a healthy, positive version of media. Because right now it's hard to tell when that's going to happen. But the question is, it's the power of what you see, the power of what you think about, the power of what you focus, it could really dramatically shape, what happens in your life. And so I just wonder if we really have the luxury of time to just wait around. And it's interesting. People talk about like even with like TikTok, how there's certain content that's published in China versus the content that's published in the US. Like, why is that? Right? Why is it that you have one population being fed like science, STEM, like science and technology, and here we're being fed, dances, like there is a real, like all these things really there is a long-term effect, and I don't and it may be it's something that we should move in terms of priorities, to think about, what are we willing to accept? Um,
And there are various theories on why audiences in China are seeing that educationally rich content. We're seeing more of the entertainment content. You mentioned the dances. I've read different articles around that. The simplest explanation without any theories thrown at it is that's what we're gravitating towards. That's what we're engaging with. So we're seeing more of that content in our feeds. I'll tell you, it's so hard to believe uh, different posts, different content these days. It's tough to tell what's real, whether we're talking about food, whether we're talking about mental health. You're talking about the power of thought, why our words, why what we're thinking throughout the day matter, how we can manifest. And it's so refreshing to hear it from a doctor because, again, I'll go on Instagram later and be fed, three, four different interpretations and perspectives.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and that notion of truth that you just mentioned. I mean, it's crazy to think that we're in a world where we really can't tell what the truth is, and that even even more so with like health data. There's so many people out there with no health training that are out there, putting pushing health information that that we really but they do it so convincingly, and they do it in an entertainment fashion where but it sounds like it's true. There's a true scientific foundation to it, but there isn't. But we're flooded with it, so it's hard to tell what's what, and it becomes a real challenge for the average person. So it's it's in one hand it's a real problem. On the other hand, it's a massive opportunity for people like us at SohoMD, where we can say we're going to really cultivate, what we think are the real facts, what we think is, are the real evidence out there of what should be done in terms of achieving certain health goals and putting that forth and becoming a source of truth that people can rely on and trust.
Absolutely. In a world where everyone's an expert and if something is shared enough times or if an influencer or content creator talks about it, and the more times we hear the same information from the more sources we believe it, even if it's false.
Yeah.
And what you've built with Soho MD, you had mentioned factors that shape treatment and how it's not always conducive to a clinical environment. Um, what was the vision here? Why is telehealth the way of the future? What does that open up? What does that make available for the end user?
Yeah. With SolarMD, after a residency, I worked with the underserved population for years, and my goal was really saying, how do I create an environment where I can optimize their care, and the fact that I had so many challenges with working with the system and really addressing their needs is was the inspiration for SolarMD. So I went out and I said I could do a better job of doing healthcare than what I was seeing, and the goal was to say, how do I take everything that I can find that exists in terms of approaches to care, and then create a way for the average clinician to have access to that approach and make it affordable to the most patients because we take insurance. And so when it comes to leveraging technology, that became one more way for us to make healthcare more affordable, more equitable. Someone who's working a job, they might not have the ability to leave the job, travel for half an hour, go sit down in an office, and then be seen for 20 minutes, and then travel back for half an hour. So technology is just one more barrier that's been removed in someone being able to access care. And that's why that was a huge, huge transition when, especially with COVID. COVID is really what changed the regulations to allow for the adoption of telemedicine, and so that was a silver lining from that experience. That's why it's been so important. And so, looking for ways to take the best of what exists, but making it affordable and available to everyone is what the goal has been.
Available to everyone. If more of us are mentally well, what does that mean for the community? What does that mean for the country, the world? Absolutely, and that's what I imagine. I've had to use telehealth for different injuries. I fractured my third metacarpal, and I was able to really streamline my doctor's appointments. I live in Los Angeles, the amount of traffic, you're talking about a half hour there, half hour back. If you hit traffic, you lose an extra hour, 2 hours throughout the day. You're trying to schedule during business hours to meet with the right medical professionals. So this
Exactly.
allows more people to manage their mental health. I said this what I imagine. This is what you're measuring as well too. You're seeing better outcomes from patients by making it easier and more affordable to access care.
Yeah, absolutely. Because part of the what makes it work, especially when it comes to talk therapy, is the consistency. It's like going to the gym, right? If you go to the gym once a month, you're not going to see much difference. But you're going on a regular basis. So by using telemedicine, you're able to make it easy for people to show consistently and to get the results that they're looking for. And what's another interesting trend that's happening is also wearables, right? So
Mhm.
with the combination of technology and medicine, we're now also starting to get access to wearable data. So your sleep patterns, your activity levels, just all that information becomes more useful data that helps us see patterns in terms of how you're doing and seeing how you're responding to the care that we're providing. So all those things, all that whole incorporation of technology into medicine, it's going to truly, I think, move the needle in terms of the overall health of the population.
Overall health of the population, that's a great goal to be playing for. And understand the consistency, understand the wearables, so you're getting better outcomes. You're able to really address what's occurring inside someone's body, physiological side. You're able to have more talk therapy occurring and really work through that trauma, improve the beliefs, the thoughts that go on a daily basis. I make all these analogies. I play golf. I could tell you if my beliefs are not strong getting onto the golf course, I'm gonna have a bad round. Where if I just came off a good round, I have a radically different outcome. So much of it's mental, and I apply that towards life, business, different meetings, calls, conversations. I think there's so much available for everyone there. I mean, this is literally something everyone can be working on. And I love how you approach this saying, hey, I'm going to do a better job. I'm going to look at what's working and build a system that could take on more volume, more scale. Are there a lot of other groups doing this in the space? Any standouts for Soho MD or anything, comparing against other groups?
Yeah, well, what I love is I love the fact that more attention and more resources have gone into mental health. So I appreciate the work that, our the peers, the colleagues, the competitors. I appreciate everything that everyone's doing because having access is the first step. In terms of, we're taking an approach in terms of how to optimize the quality of that experience. But I think just in general, I think it's been a huge plus across, just across the board. So I'm very pleased to see what, everyone in the space is doing just in general. I think that they're really making a positive mark at improving the health of the population. In terms of, room for improvement, there's a lot of room for improvement. I think the shift to functional medicine, the incorporation of other ways to think about mental health, the power of talk therapy. There's just so much that's going on that I think will get adopted. I see us as a market leader where we're doing things that are a little bit ahead of the rest of the market, but I think it's a direction that the overall market will move in. Um, but it's so important because there's so many people who are suffering silently where they don't realize they're depressed and it could be treated. They don't realize that they're anxious and they don't have to live that way. So I think that we know that the need for the care is much higher than our ability to meet that need, and so there's a massive opportunity for both for SohoMD and everyone else in the marketplace for all of us to grow and succeed and help the country just get better, just live better lives, live fuller lives.
Absolutely. And I think now's the perfect time to do it. There may have been, a stigma decades back around getting professional help, or like you said, everyone experiences something at some point. You made the comparison of going to the gym, working on your mental health, managing it, uh, making it more accessible for everyone as a whole. And I could tell you some of the platforms I've used in the past were a bit wonky. You're going to be able to move faster than some of these insurance companies and groups out there. Even just seeing what you guys have built, the features, what you're bringing to market for that better approach, could understand why you guys are standing out.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Yeah, we've really thought about it, and we've been at it for a while. I mean, we've been at it for 14 years, so we've really been thinking about, how to do this the right way, and really thinking about, the patient and really making sure that we can help the patient get the best outcomes and achieve those personal goals.
Absolutely. Want to put the business hat on for a moment, test, optimize, scale, like packaging actionable insights for the audience. You've built an amazing platform with Soho MD. What recommendations would you have for founders who are tuned in? What could they test out towards their own growth and making their vision come to life?
Yeah, for founders, I think what after being in business for years, I think there are a couple things I've learned. I think the first thing is surrounding yourself with the best people. So really making sure that for each of the areas that you have people either internal or external who are really expert at that part of the business. And really, being able to take a step back and being able to really be honest with yourself. What are the areas where you're doing well and versus not doing well? And being able to have the courage to make the change. And I think, when especially when you're small, there's a lot more tolerance for things not going well, or you just or you let things slip, by or get by and it's okay. But if you don't address it, you pay a price down the road. So I think the ability to, make sure that you have those best people, that you take a step back and you maybe have mentors or have a way to get perspective to make sure that you're doing the key parts of the business well. I think that those are key things for any business owner or business leader that they should always keep in mind. The other thing is, I think, really always being able to stay connected to the customer's needs. What are the priorities for your customers? So you may have your corporate priorities in terms of what you feel are, what's important and what you want to pursue. But I think businesses that seem to do the best are the ones who understand the direction that their customers are going in and really being able to be clear in defining who your customer is and making sure that your growth plan, your strategy, your focus is really geared towards their needs. And then it makes it very easy to grow together with your customer base versus if you shift that perspective as a business, then you might find that you're actually shifting your customer base, which could slow down your growth. So I think that those would be a couple different points or perspectives I would put out there for other founders.
Brilliant. As a marketer, staying connected to the customer, their needs, not just what you think that they are, the measurements, the analytics, having actual numbers behind it so you can make data-driven decisions, as well as the team, surrounding yourself with the right people, looking at what you do well, what you don't, what the team's doing well, where they're underperforming, having the right mentors and perspective, people who have been down your road or similar trails before can tell you what's coming next, maybe even make it a quicker path for you. What about when you have all these pieces in play? The team's there, you understand what the customers need. At the same time, you're not hitting the goals right out of the gate. Common for startups, growth stage companies as a whole. I'd argue every business at one point. What are the best approaches to optimize and or pivot?
Yeah, I think the way to um, really focus on what's important when you feel like you're not hitting the goals is to really have the right mentor group to put forth whatever it is that you've been pursuing. Because a lot of times, the things that make you a great entrepreneur and business person are also the things that might get in your way. So the fact that there's a lack of patience, right? Sometimes things take time. You plant a seed in the ground, you can't drive when it sprouts. Like it'll eventually get there, but you have to keep watering it, making sure it gets enough sun. It has enough. Fertilizer, whatever. You have to make sure that
Oh
you
yeah.
supply the right environment for the growth. But certain things take time to grow, and you can't rush it. Like it's just the way things are. But being able to have people that you can speak to make sure you're doing your part, that you are doing the watering, that you are fertilizing, like you're doing all the things you need to help promote that growth. That's the part that you want to be sure of, to make sure that you are not playing a role in whatever delays you might be seeing. So I think that that's critical. And what was the second part of your question?
Just how to optimize, how to pivot. It sounds like
Yeah. Yeah.
business talk therapy, if you will, having the right consultants, mentors, groups, and understanding it's going to take time, not to rush.
Yeah.
Water, soil may need to change some things up, but it's going to take time either way.
Yeah, and I would say when it comes to pivoting, a smart pivot is something that I think takes you closer to the truth of where you should have been in the first place.
Mm.
So I think pivoting for the purpose of pivoting, it doesn't yield success. I think when you realize it's what it's like. It's like if we're in the forest and walking around, and we realize like, oh my God, we're going in the wrong direction. then you pivot, you change direction because you've taken a step back and looked strategically at the map and said, "Oh, I've been trying to go to this part of the map and I happen to have been going in the wrong direction. I'm changing direction to get me to a place that I've been trying to get to." And so I think that's the same with business. You don't pivot into something completely, that has nothing to do with, with what you were trying to achieve unless it's taking you closer to some truth that you didn't see before. So it might seem like it's very different, but in reality, it's pointing you in the direction where you really should have been going in the first place, and you just didn't see it, but now you see it, which is why it seems new, but it really should be connected to something that's meaningful and true. Otherwise, if you're chasing things because you think that that's what you should be doing, and you do it for the wrong reasons, I don't think that yields success. I think that there's something underneath. When people succeed, I think that there's this notion of making things better for that customer, and that's really what drives their business, that drives their vision, and that's what they're trying to pursue. I think that again, there's a truth to it, and that is consistent with people who I think are able to achieve success in business and whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah, because you have to be able to manage things to the point of effectiveness. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable at times. And I've asked that question over 200 times on this show. I don't think I've gotten that answer before. And I'll tell you why that means something to me. What you're saying is you're shifting to get to where you ultimately should have been going in the first place. So it is a pivot, but off that central target. I actually have a little bit of an uncomfortability when I say the word pivot. I'm far more connected to optimization. It's what we do with media buying and our marketing campaigns. And the reason why is pivoting. I almost feel like I'm telling the founders to try something different, try something new. And that is true if it's going after that same aim, what we should have been doing in the first place. So, doing it just to do what's trendy, or hey, I'm getting some pressure, we should try something completely different, not as productive, but approaching it in a smart way, looking at the actual truth and trying to figure out what does this map actually say for where I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because time is so limited, you definitely want to make good use of it, and I think each of us has something that we're pursuing. So it's good to connect to that as soon as you can.
Final question is around scale, what we're all playing for. Your LinkedIn showcases over 115 million in revenue. You're an amazing person to speak to about this question as you figure out a model that is producing for you. It's working within all of the systems and parameters. How do you effectively scale and go after larger, loftier goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. For scale, my biggest concern about scale was quality. And when it comes to healthcare, there's a particular concern because when you talk about a decrease in quality, you're talking about people's lives. And from the get go, the thinking was, how do we structure something in a modular way so that the quality and the systems are all contained within these subunits, that we're adding additional subunits so that we're not centrally, so the quality component isn't centrally controlled, it's more distributed, so that we have checks and balances in a way that as we add groups and as we add units, that they're self-contained. They're self-contained in terms of their ability to stay efficient and maintain quality controls. That's been the key part, because when you do scale, you lose touch with all the parts of your business, and that's where you can really have some blind spots that can really bring down the business. And so I think for any founder who's looking to think about, how do I scale aggressively? How do I scale up? Is really thinking from the beginning, how do I maintain a way to maintain quality without me having to have direct oversights over all aspects of that part of the business, that the quality is built into how things operate, and so that if I go, 10x, 100x, whatever, that I know that I'm still going to be just as happy with how the business is operating at that level as it was when it was significantly smaller.
Should ultimately be able to improve quality with the increase to resources. And I think everyone can relate to a business that was great before they started expanding. I could tell you about
Totally.
restaurants, even tell you about the medical groups in Los Angeles where, you feel like, you're one of 1,000 patients that they're speaking to that day, and that affects the relationship, obviously, for psychiatry, talk therapy. that there needs to be that personalized aspect of it, of course. So maintaining, even looking for ways to enhance quality while you're 10x, 100x levels.
Exactly.
Okay. This is amazing. I've put together 2 pages of notes here and feel like I could talk to you for hours. As we begin to wrap the episode, where can the audience go if they want to learn more? And any final thoughts that you want to leave us with today?
Um, yeah, so they can go to sohomd.com. We have some new projects we're working on. We have some partnerships that we'll be announcing soon. So we have a lot happening there. So they can, that's a great place to get connected. People can also reach out on LinkedIn, especially if they're in the industry or adjacent industries, happy to connect around mental health and the application to business and performance for corporations. And the other final thought I would leave people with is when it comes to your mental health, that really thinking holistically about it is important. That it's not just about popping a pill. It's not just about simple just going in and talking about the same thing in therapy. Making sure that you have a team. It doesn't have to be us, but just anybody. That having a team that's really thinking holistically about all aspects of your health, how to optimize it. Thinking about your relationships, your activity level. Just really thinking about how do you live to the your to the highest potential. How do you live the fullest life? And how do you make all parts of your life healthy? When you do those things, that's how you optimize your mental health. And so taking that perspective, taking that broader view is what I'd want everyone to kind of think about when it comes to their care. And I think that they'll see the benefits of taking that approach.
I'm inspired. Dr. Jock, this has been a great episode. I'm going to be thinking about my beliefs, my relationships, my health throughout the day here and onward. I know the audience is going to get a lot out of it here as well, too. Want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on here, educate us, show us your perspective, show us how you've built Soho MD. It's been a real privilege.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jason.
Thank you. And we'll appreciate you tuning in next time as well. For everyone who's tuned in, definitely reach out to Dr. Jock, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.